Hi, I'm Gina Wagers, and this is Module 8, Leading with a Moral Compass. So to begin with, I kind of broke down each of the resources and found some common themes to kind of summarize each of them. So the first question that obviously comes up with this module is, what is a moral compass? So moral compasses are those judgments that we make. A lot of times they are based on emotions or intuitions or feelings we have. Maybe they're based on a set of beliefs that we necessarily can't even describe because they are formed over time and we believe in these things, but we might not necessarily recognize that we hold these beliefs. So I thought it was interesting too that with a moral compass, this is like basically a framework that provides us standards to help us define and address like what we consider ethical behavior, not just in the context of like how we make our own individual decisions, but also taking into account what's good for society as a whole as well. And so, and again, like the interesting piece for me thinking about this was that these are developed over time, and that a lot of different factors can influence these, whether it's religious affiliation, the way that we're raised as children, other institutions that we participate in, where we work. But the thing that remains throughout our lives are a set of essentially those core values. And I think it was Wood that said 3 to 5 of those are what become those core values that really drive our moral compass and then influence us as individuals and our decision-making process. So why is a moral compass important then? Well, it gives us that criteria for measuring those decisions within our decision-making process. I think it's also important because it helps us understand how our personal values might affect a decision prior to the decision being made. I know a lot of times we talk about reflection after a decision is made, like, was this a good decision? What would I have done differently? What are the consequences of this decision now that I'm seeing? But I think a moral compass is a way to pre-reflect or think about things before we make a decision because it gives us a different insight on why we're making the decision that we're making before we make it. I think it also, based on what a lot of the resources mentioned, it helps us focus on perspectives rather than on consequences as we're thinking about our decision-making process. This really helps us as leaders because it ensures that our decisions are being made based on our core values rather than fear of a potential outcome, right? Because we can't guarantee outcomes that will happen, whether they do or not. But staying true to who we are and what we believe is an important part of leadership. And so I think it gives us that framework for utilizing those core values throughout, even before we make a decision. And then it also, I think, gives us a way to check our emotional reactions with logical rationalizations. Because again, a lot of times the things we believe in are really deeply rooted in who we are, and we have strong emotional responses to things that don't align with what we believe in. And so I think it's important to understand how we're going to feel emotionally about a decision that we have to make as a leader and separate that from the facts and the logical choices that we need to make as leaders. So how does a leader use their moral compass then? I think we can kind of break this into 2 categories. Obviously, our moral compass leads us as an individual, helps us to consider our own needs and the needs of others before we act. And it helps us essentially to choose actions that maximize the net benefits. It's not just something that should be good for us, but it should be something that should be good for everyone that we're leading or that we're influencing with our decision. And then with that too, leaders use their moral compass then to influence their community or the institution that they're with. So it shapes essentially the way communities are formed, the way people interact with each other within those communities. And so it really helps to create a culture and climate. And it also, in a way, establishes guidelines for how people are going to interact with each other within that body, whether it's a school or elsewhere. And I think, too, one of the resources mentioned something that really struck me as important, too, is we as leaders have to be aware of the communities that we're working in and working with because they have their own established values. And then I think, too, just thinking about how schools become a reflection of those communities' values is really important too, because we have the ability to influence what values and standards and morals are being taught and embodied and lived out in the school setting. And so then those, I think, also have the same ability to go and influence their communities as well. So being cognizant of the fact that there's this give and take with leadership using a moral compass, and being aware of how that community has formed its own belief systems too. Potential issues that I think that can arise with having a strong moral compass as a leader. Obviously, everybody's moral compass is their own, and so no two people's point of views or directions may be the same. And I think that raises an interesting point when you're talking about leadership, because we want everybody to have a shared set of values that we believe in, to invest in and become part of that community so that they want to live out that vision and mission, but also you want to be respectful of those individual values and beliefs that may be different. So I think there's this interesting balance between getting everyone to believe the same things versus respecting that there are going to be different perspectives and values, and how those can be balanced so that everyone is still working on a common vision for what they want the school to look like. I think too, the interesting thing that a lot of the resources touched on was that knowledge is endlessly evolving. And I think in education too, we always talk about this pendulum swinging back and forth between, we go from one extreme to the other, or we'll pilot one thing. When it doesn't work, we try another thing. So I think education is ever evolving and changing too. And so I think being aware of how those actions and beliefs sometimes do need to be fluid and adapt to certain changes that we're seeing in education and society as a whole is really important as a leader too, like having your strong core values, but then also understanding how other people's values are being influenced by the things that are happening around them too. And then also finally, people's personal perceptions make it very difficult to get individual members of the community to develop a common moral compass, because obviously your personal perception is that you have an expectation of what is right and wrong. You have an expectation of how people should think or behave, and based on what you think is right or wrong. And so again, just being aware that it's not just about being empathetic and understanding other people's points of view and values, but really you have to find common ground in which you can agree on what you want those values, how you want them to be lived out in the school. So I think as I was personally reflecting on this point in particular, one thing that crossed my mind that I think maybe I would potentially struggle with the most in a leadership role with thinking about values and the potential for it creating issues in a leadership role was just, especially in schools when it comes to administering discipline within the school setting, because I think there are so many factors that play into that, right? You want to be very aware of this individual student when you're administering a consequence based on their values and their beliefs and their record with the school, but then you also need to be thinking about the greater whole of the school as a whole and balancing what's good and important for them as well. So I think that's one area that this could potentially be the hardest when you have a strong moral compass and you truly believe there is a right and a wrong, especially when it comes to discipline, whether it's staff or students, could be potentially an issue. So then what impact does a moral compass have on leadership? Well, it helps to create a higher sense of self-confidence. If you know who you are and what you believe in, you're less likely to be swayed by the influence of others, which I think is important when you're in a leadership position, because people will perceive whether or not you're an effective or successful leader based on how well you stick to what you say you're going to do. And if you're that person who is the yes man, where whoever's in front of you, the answer to that person is yes, and then when they leave the room and another person asks for something that maybe is contradicting what the other person asks for, and you say yes to that as well, that can you can end up undermining yourself as a leader. So I think being consistent in who you are and knowing yourself and being confident in your own values will help, because then you'll be less likely to be influenced by others and make decisions based on other people. I think it was also interesting that one of the resources mentioned that it gives you this integrity reflex, and I just really liked that word. And a way of thinking of this as something that becomes so automatic to you that it's part of kind of like your reflection process. It's just part of what you naturally think about and you naturally do as a leader. And it doesn't have to be something that creates huge moral conflict every time you have to make a decision, because you know who you are and you can stick to your beliefs while also balancing the needs of everybody else. Some of the other resources mentioned a lot of creating this sense of higher purpose, right? This selflessness that's associated with being an empathetic leader and being able to make decisions that are not just in your personal values or align with what you believe, but are in the best interest of everybody that's involved. And then I think too, it was really interesting that a lot of the resources mentioned that it's this ability to think and take responsibility in the face of perpetual uncertainty. And again, I think a lot of times we can't prepare for the decisions that we're going to make. A lot of times we have to make those in the moment, especially in those leadership positions. But I think having a strong set of values that allow you to act morally and ethically, no matter what the situation is that arises, is really important and can really benefit you as a leader. So then thinking about all of that information and how I would kind of lay out my own moral compass, I listed, based on the resources mentioning that really it essentially boils down to your 3 to 5 core values. I listed what I think my core driving values are just as a person from my personal life experiences, and the way that I want to be perceived in my professional life and roles. And so at the very top was integrity. And to me, like, that's one of the most important things, because I don't think you can be an effective leader or really interact well with other people if they don't buy in and believe that you are who you say you are. And so for me, that's like my north on my compass, is just having integrity, making sure that who I say I am and the actions that I take and the decisions that I make always align with what I say and what I truly believe. And then kind of on the sides of the compass, I listed honesty and consistency and respect, because I believe all of those things play a key role in integrity, right? If I say that I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. I'm consistent in that, and that I always act with respect, whether it's somebody that I agree with or disagree with. Like, respect is a huge thing. I think it's super important, not just as a leader, but when you're interacting with anybody, no matter what. And I think that plays a role in integrity too, because you can't say that you are a person who cares about making decisions that benefit everybody if you really are not making decisions that benefit everybody. And then the other value that I listed that I would say probably next to integrity is most important for me, that really guides my north direction, would be a sense of responsibility and purpose. Because I believe if you know where you want to go, and I think you have a clear vision of who you want to be, and who you are, then you can be a person with integrity. I think if you lose sight of your responsibilities, or you lose sight of what your purpose is or why you're doing what you're doing, it's really hard to have any of those other values and keep them aligned. So that's why I kind of put those little asterisks with those two, because I believe those two working together in conjunction really in my life are what keep my compass pointing in the north direction, with all of those other traits or qualities really supporting that. And then also in my visual, I included this really bold red line, because there was a resource that mentioned like drawing a line in the sand and realizing like what is negotiable for you and what is non-negotiable, not just as an individual, but as your role as a leader. And so I listed a few things for me that like are my non-negotiables that I don't ever want to do, because I know like once you cross that line, it's harder to come back. And for me, that's like where things would be heading south on my compass. So that would be like thinking in terms of short-term solutions, things that are temporary fixes to bigger problems that might create more problems down the road, negotiating values to please other people, and then making decisions based on personal gratification or selfishness. So for me, those are things that are definitely, that's the line in the sand. Like, those are things that I don't value, that I don't want to do, like as a person or a leader. And then references listed here. The correlation to the standards, this assignment correlates with the standards because it gives the opportunity to reflect on my personal values and the extent to which those shape my professional dispositions and influence my decision making. This assignment also gave me the opportunity to understand how a strong moral compass supports ethical behavior and also influences the capacity for successful leadership. The resources really helped me understand the overlap between personal and professional values as a result of having a moral compass. And then it also helped me understand how moral compasses are developed. This assignment was relevant to my learning because it improved my ability to recognize personal values that I hold, how they drive my compass and decision making, and then like the ways that those can either support or really create conflict within me when I have to make decisions in my role as a professional and a leader. This assignment also improved my understanding of the development of a moral compass and the ways in which strong leaders actually take the time to understand what they value and then what their stakeholders value as well. This assignment influenced the decisions that I'm going to make as a future school leader because I've taken the time to reflect on who I am, the values that I hold, and the ways in which these values can support me in making sound ethical decisions. This assignment also helped me understand the importance of balancing my emotions and instincts with fact-finding and logical thinking in order to be a fair, consistent, and effective leader. And then creating the visual of my moral compass helped me identify and reflect on the types of ethical decisions that I think I might struggle